His presence, there's fullness of joy. Let's invite him here now. Sing. I give you glory for all you brought me through. And now I'm ready for whatever you want to do. Come on, sing it out if you believe that. I'm moving forward to follow after you. We sing. And now I'm ready for whatever you want to do. Come on, we invite you. Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Sing your presence. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Come on, we sing it every season. And every season, your grace has been enough. I'm believing, and I'm believing the best is yet to come. Come on, we sing the cross. The cross before me, my hope on things above. And in you, Jesus, the best is yet to come. We say, your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Hey, come on, whatever it is you're going through this morning, whatever it is that the enemy has lied to you about in your life, this morning we're going to take control of that. See, the battle is coming, but the war has already been won. So let's sing this in victory. We say, 'cause I know breakthrough is coming, and by faith I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Come on, stir up your faith. We say, oh, I know breakthrough is coming, and by faith I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Oh, I know breakthrough is coming, and by faith I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. 'Cause I know breakthrough is coming, and by faith I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Let me sing this out. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Sing His presence. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Come on, if you need Him in this place this morning, just lift up your hands. Open up your heart. Whatever you need is here in the presence of God. Whatever you need is here in the presence of God. Whatever we need. So let's confess this with our mouths as we say, 'cause I know breakthrough is coming. By faith I see a miracle. Oh, my God made me a promise and it
is a glory of God that is waking up the earth this hour. A glory that calls us to have confidence enough to say it is well. A glory that will surpass the glory of the past because we've learned what we have learned and we're now being called to move forward. A glory that will remind us of all that God has always done. Like when he took people who were slaves and he called them out of slavery, and the people, all the people, not just a few priests, not just a few prophets, but all the people walked from slavery to a place of freedom through the Red Sea. And then God did it again when he called a group of people to go across the River Jordan and go from what was freedom to the promised land. Freedom's pretty good, but the promised land is something better. And then he did it again when he told not a few people, but a whole bunch of people to march around the walls of Jericho, and they had to fight a battle. They marched and they fought, but it was God who tore the walls down. And God still tears walls down today because of the glory that is waking up the earth this hour. And then he did it again when a prophet and 7,000 in a nation refused to bow their knee to the compromise in their nation. And God consumed the sacrifice with fire. And he drew a line in the middle of the nation. And he said, this I will receive, and this I will reject. And he did it again when his fire fell on 120 saints in an upper room. And the glory that came down that day is the same glory that is waking us up this day. It's not a new glory. It's the glory that's always been. A glory that is waking us up. It's not coming, it's already here. The glory has been here. Do you hear it? Do you see it? Do you perceive what God is doing? Because the glory of the Lord is always more than enough. The glory of the Lord in this generation is enough to overwhelm us and anoint parents in this generation to raise children who will stand up for Jesus in this generation against the enemies of this generation. The same glory is the glory that is upon the leaders of this generation who will raise up a standard in this generation. We're not lowering anything. We're raising a standard for a generation to step up to, that we might experience the fullness of the glory that is here. The glory is enough. And it is waking us up. Let's take a step back. By now, y'all know I have to get this thing out of the way. Let's do it like this. There was a guy named Simon. And Simon had an invitation to come speak at a huge conference for a little company you might have heard of called Microsoft. And he went and he spoke there, and a couple of weeks later, he had another invitation to go speak at another huge tech company that you may have heard of as well called Apple. And so he speaks for Microsoft and he speaks for Apple, and he says, you know, something that was very interesting. When I spoke at Microsoft, all the leaders and the executives, all they talked about was how to beat Apple. And then when I went to Apple and listened to all of their leaders and all their executives, all they talked about was how to empower teachers, how their technology would empower students, how what they were doing was going to make a difference. And so I had to get in a cab and take a cab with a high-level Apple engineer, and we hopped on this cab, and we were on our way to the airport, and I looked over at him. And this was years ago, he said. They had given him, at Microsoft, he said they had given him this little device called a Zune. There's a reason you've never heard of it. He said, I had this Zune, and I looked over at the Apple executive, and I said, hey, you know, this Zune product that Microsoft makes is infinitely better than your iPod. He said the Apple exec looked at him and said, I have no doubt. And that was the end of the conversation. If we have been called to run a race, what exactly is the race that we're running? Like when the Apostle Paul wakes up a generation and he says, we must run this race, where are we going? Like, who are we running against? Is my competition the person in the pew beside me? Who is the enemy? Where's the finish line? Like, how do we define this race? If I asked you, are you winning? You should look at me and, at what? What am I winning at? Are we winning at life? I don't know what that means. But we are running a race, and we are called to win this race. And if we're looking for the glory of God, in what space, where are we looking for the glory of God? Because in church, we should be looking for the glory of God. Church is a race. Are we winning? What is the win? The win is the glory. What does that mean? We're going to talk about it. In your household, at home, are you winning? Because it doesn't do a whole lot of good if we're crushing it at work and then failing miserably at home. And it doesn't do us much good either if we are absolutely making it happen at home. But we go to work and we're miserable in the best, most productive hours of our week. So when I say, are you winning? Are you winning? Are we winning? And so Paul, with all of this on his mind, in prison, he writes a letter to his star player. And he says to him, well, let's read it. How about that? 1 Timothy chapter 1, beginning at verse 18, Paul says, Timothy, this charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith. So when we're getting this thing right, we are holding to faith and a good conscience. When we're getting this thing right, to hold faith and a good conscience, then there are a certain set of prophecies that have been spoken to us, over us, for us, that will actually be a guidepost for us in waging a good warfare. Waging a bad warfare is living a life that is actually finding a place where our faith is shipwrecked. That means we believe nothing, we do nothing, we hope for nothing, nothing matters anymore. We just go through a few obligatory lifestyle things and we hope it's enough. That isn't winning. That isn't the glory of God. That is not what we have been called to experience. Our call is that we have been given, we have been charged, we have been entrusted with something to wage a good warfare. And by wage a good warfare, I think it's pretty obvious that there's a battle or two, or three, or more. Who has kids? Anybody have kids? Wow, y'all are a prolific group. All right, so I've got a few kids. And, I've noticed when you tell kids something, sometimes they listen, and sometimes they don't. When you demand of your children, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You instruct them, discipline them, implore them. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So unashamedly, I feel like I have a really talented group of kids. And so as a result, there's always somebody trying out for something, or there's a production, or there's a game, or an event, or something that is going on in our household that raises a little bit of a level of anxiety. Because when kids have a tryout that is coming up, it's no different than if we have a point where we're going in for an interview, or if we have a big presentation, or if we have a job that's got to get done, and there's like when stuff's going on in the house, the anxiety is a little bit higher, and you can just feel it. It's almost palpable sometimes at the dinner table where they're just kind of they go into themselves. And so being very discerning at times when kids that talk 100 miles a minute now aren't saying a word, it's a little bit of an indication that something's going on. You spend enough time with your kids, you learn these things. Many times I think a good parent's just one that's there. Like, we're gonna get a whole lot wrong, but you know what? Just being there many times is enough right to make the whole thing work. And so noticing one of these kids was just a little bit, I'm like, what's going on? They said, I'm just like this thing, it's just like, I don't know, but I'm just so worried about it. And then, you have all these scriptures that are just right there that you've told them 100 times. And then I just thought, I'm going to let them swim in this for a little bit. Maybe they'll find it. Next day, I'm just really, haven't you know it's in there? Pull it out. No. Still worried, still anxious, still not speaking the word. We go to church, and I could just tell I make my kids sit on the front, I make them come, and I make them sit on the front row with me. And I look over and just no even sense of loving Jesus in that moment. All the cares of the world that children deal with overwhelming their countenance. Well, it came time, the worship team just crushed it. Came time for me to come up and do something. And so I come up and I'm just looking out, and amazingly, he wasn't the only one, she wasn't the only one sitting on the front row without a worship. Like, the whole room was pathetic. And so I decided to parent for a moment. Not just mine, but all of us. And encouraged us that there's something we can sing about my weapon is a melody, but if we don't sing the melody, we don't ever pull the weapon out. We can talk about raising a hallelujah, but until that hallelujah is raised, nothing actually happens. And so I go stand to the side, they sing the song again, and I look at the front row. And I see a hint of worship from the front row. And then a little more. And a little more in the audience. And then I felt good enough, okay, we can preach the gospel now. We get in the car, we're riding on our way to lunch, and I said, how was church for everybody? And the one that had been dealing with the anxiety of the stuff that was going on says, when you did that little, inspirational thing, if you ever want to be encouraged, just sit down with your kids. They will lift you up and bless you. Yeah, I know about that little inspirational thing. Said, yeah, I kind of lifted my hands and got into that for a minute. And I just felt something bad just leave me. I said, It's amazing what happens. The glory was there the whole time. But it wasn't until we did something that the glory that was present made a difference in us. And they went on the next few days of tryouts, no anxiety, had a great time, got the thing they wanted to get, and everybody's happy. The glory makes a difference. But preceding the glory is our participation. And we see this in this text. Paul says, Timothy, I charge you. I entrust you. Why did he entrust Timothy? Because Timothy had been faithful in a space where Timothy could be faithful, and because Timothy had been faithful, he was being given more to be faithful with. There are times in our lives where we are believing God for more, we're asking God for something more, but he can't trust us with more because we haven't been faithful with what we've had. This charge was given to Timothy to go to Ephesus. Ephesus was a big deal for the Apostle Paul. It was that place where when he came in, he found just a few disciples, and he preached to them, and he laid his hands on them, and 12 of them were filled with the Spirit of God and began to speak in tongues and prophesy in that moment. And that was the foundation of that church that would continue to grow and grow and grow. And Paul spent almost 3 years of his life in that church, teaching that church, nurturing that church, pulling the weeds out of that church so that church could grow. And now away from that church, that's the church that hugged his neck, that cried and lamented his leaving. That church, the one that he loved so much, that's the one that he tells Timothy, I charge you and entrust you with this message for these people. What are we doing that wakes up God's trust in us to give us something more to do? 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 2 says, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Not suggested, not hoped for, required. And when we talk about stuff like this, we actually don't like to. We don't like hearing about it. We don't like this idea that church becomes all of a sudden obligatory. Oh, that is religion. Is it? Is being required to do something religion, or is it just playing by the rules of the relationship? It is required of stewards that they be found faithful. The beauty of being faithful is it is the doorway to more. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3. The best friend of Jesus, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit of God, says this. For the love of God is this, that we keep his commandments. The love of God immediately connected to commandments. The love of God is this, that we keep his commandments. And then it says, and his commandments are not burdensome. So it's not that we can't do them. They're not a burden to us. Actually, they're enjoyable because the commandments are the benchmark for us to succeed at so that we can be blessed. The blessing is not an entitlement. The blessing is the reward for faithfulness. If I haven't been given anything to be faithful doing, then I have no opportunity for blessing. So I love the idea of the charge. I love the idea of being entrusted with something because it gives me something to do to be rewarded. If I make no investment, I can expect no return. Like, until I participate in the kingdom, there isn't anything for me to receive from the kingdom. It is required that we be found faithful. Jesus was telling a parable one day, Matthew 25. He's just having this conversation with his people. And he tells a story, a metaphor, if you will. And he talked about these 3 guys that were all given something to work with. And one was given 5 things, and one was given 2, and another was given 1. And the only ones that he said, well done to, were the ones who had done something. If I'm looking for well done in my future, I have to look at something I've done in my past. Like, to expect a well done, there has to be work. And I get it. It's the hustle, it's the grind, it's the thing that's not always shiny and glittering. But it leads us to that place. It brings us to that place of reward. Because there is reward. Like when Paul said, according to the prophecies. According to the prophecies. Like hearing God is the reward. There is something about living faithfully that like life is given to that when I hear him say something. When sitting in church, I hear something that just wakes up my soul. Let's look at it like this. What if your spouse, how many of you are married? Any married people out there? Lots of those too. I guess that makes sense with all the kids. So what if your spouse was like really faithful, but an absolute bore? Like you come home and how was your day? Huh? Sit down to eat. How's dinner? Huh? Okay. Want to go on vacation? Huh? Faithful. And that's good. Like faithfulness is good. But there's no life. Like faithfulness is the work. But then all of a sudden there's this conversation where God, who is looking down, sees someone faithful and he steps into their world to just have this conversation with them. And in that conversation, life is just woken up in us. It's not you just being faithful. It's the expectation of God speaking. It was according to the prophecies which had already been spoken. Timothy had been living faithfully doing these things. When Paul said, look, I need you to come with me, Timothy always came. When they went places that were difficult, people like John Mark had dropped off before. They quit. People like Demas, more in love with the world, more in love with the present life than in the kingdom, walked away. But who was always there? Timothy. And who was getting all the prophecies along the way? Timothy. Why? Because he was the only one, or at least a one, that was living according to what had been laid out for him to do. When God has spoken to you, have you been faithful in that place where he spoke? I'm not looking for him to speak again until I followed him in the last thing that he said. When something in the gospel opens up to me and leads me in a direction, it's not for like 2 days or 3 days or 4 weeks. If it's a lifetime instruction, then it's a lifetime of faithfulness that is required. I get a lot of speeding tickets. I get a lot of speeding tickets. Like a lot. And I got so many the other day, like a year and a half ago, that they said I had to do this. It sounds worse than it is. It's like a probationary thing where you're not allowed to have like another ticket or you can't drive like forever. But it was only you couldn't get another ticket for the next 12 months. And so for 12 months, man, like I was 10 and 2, buckled, eye on the speedometer. I mean, rigid, law-abiding. And then I got my congratulations letter. You did it. I'm like, I did it. I'm done. And right back at me. And so I got another ticket the other day. And I'm like, Then I got to thinking about it. Like, my driving is a problem. It's a problem. But the thing is, it's not like a 12-month solution. It is in my best interest to obey. It's in my best interest to obey. It's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. It's safer for me, for the people on the road around me, for the people in my car. When your kids are saying, "Hey, Dad, I think that was red," it's become a problem. Are those rules burdens? No, they're not burdens. They're a gateway to peacefulness. They're a gateway to savings. They're a gateway to joy. Because if we could flip the script, the thing about being given a command from God is that at the very beginning, it might be a little hard to hear, and at the very beginning, it might take a little work to adhere to, but the end is life. Sin, on the other side, is real easy to receive. Just do it. Whatever it is, look at it, watch it, listen to it, whatever, just whatever. It's all good. It's easy until it's not. Until it destroys, until it deceives, until it brings us to a place where we're no longer happy, we're no longer winning. If you want to win, it is required of us that we be found faithful. And I know sometimes you're like, dude, like this is kind of old school, right? No, it's new school. This new school, we haven't been preaching holiness in 50 years. We write books about having, best this and happiness that and free from this and free from the other. And at the end of it, what it basically is telling me is I don't have to do anything at all, and God just loves me because I exist. And that's a platitude that is awesome. But the love of God is that we keep His commandments. The love of God is that we keep His commandments. And when we're faithful in those, then He speaks to us. He tells us stuff. Like, who can speak into your life? Who? Matthew chapter 10 verse 41 says, if you receive a prophet because he is a prophet, you receive what? A prophet's reward. What does it mean to receive a prophet? It means when a word from God comes through somebody who's faithful to you who is faithful, and you trust them and you trust what he just woke up in you, that you actually do that. That's what receiving means. Receiving means I hear and I obey. That's what it is. Receiving isn't just hearing. John says if all we do is hear and we don't do, we're liars. And then if we do, but we only do it because we want to be better, but we don't do it from a place of faith or believing that Jesus has told us to do this, it's dead works. So one is dead faith, the other is a dead work, and neither one is helpful. Neither one leads to winning. But when we believe, we receive a prophet. Because he is a prophet, we receive a prophet's reward. Then he says, if you receive a righteous person, because he is a righteous person, you receive a righteous person's reward. We don't just come to church like to be entertained, like as if the glory is here and goes from the front to the back. Like it comes down so that it settles on whoever is receiving what God is doing. But he will speak through people. But what I hear this way is prospered this way. Prophets and righteous people just plant and water. But God brings the increase. When does he bring the increase for you? When you receive it. Which means that we do it. The prophecies didn't just come to encourage him. The prophecies didn't just come to encourage Timothy in some sinfulness that he was living. The prophecies came to wake him up, to point him in a direction and hold him accountable to something. The gospel will always hold us accountable. And unfortunately, that's a new idea. But if we look in our rearview mirror, decades of telling us all that God's just going to do some things and we're just all okay, we're like getting worse. It's not working. Why isn't it working? Because there's nothing for God to bless. What is he blessing? Faithfulness. I will never, ever ask for something that requires faithfulness if I have not been found faithful. And not faithful in what I want to do, faithful in what he calls me to do. In Luke chapter 16 and verse 11, it says, if you have not been found faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? The true riches are that place of happiness. Things that we chase after will never ever make us happy. Here's what happens when we chase after things instead of the purposes of God. We chase after this stuff and it makes us happy for like 13 seconds. The world gave us the joy, and the world took the joy away because the world is trying to produce a consumer, not a follower. There's a difference. It needs me to consume in order to be happy. So I consume stuff and likes and relationships. I'm not faithful in relationships. I'm just looking for more of them. I'm not looking to be faithful in the few that I have. I'm looking to heap more because I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm looking for fame because fame is going to make me happy until it's not enough. And then like 1,000 likes doesn't do it anymore, and 1,000,000 likes doesn't do it anymore, and 5, and it's never enough. Why? Because the world just wants more from me. Satan will always seek to take and take and take from you until you're depleted to nothing. That's his entire goal, to deplete you, to steal from you, to kill you, to destroy you. And when we jump in that system and we chase after these things, we're now no longer faithful with what we have, giving it to him. Like if we just talk about money for a second, which this isn't about money, but just hear me, because we can put numbers to things. Like if God gives me a whole bunch of stuff and he rewards me, and then he says, I want a portion of that. If the stuff is what I sought after, I'm not going to give him what I wanted because what I wanted was the stuff. So now I'm not faithful in what he's calling unrighteous. I'm not faithful with this because this was the goal. But if the goal was to obey him, when I obey him and he prospers me, I'm looking for him to tell me something else to be obedient with because I'm chasing obedience. I'm not chasing stuff. So if I'm not faithful with this stuff, then he says I'm not going to get the true riches. What are the true riches? It's the happiness. It's the joy. It's the peace. It's that overwhelming sense of God in my life. Psalm chapter 45 and verse 7 says it like this. You love righteousness. Righteousness, those are the commands, the doing, the things that God has called us to participate in. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, you see where the therefore is? It's after I loved righteousness and hated wickedness. It's after it. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Why beyond my companions? Because they don't love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, the reward is to the one who loves righteousness and hates wickedness. And what is the reward? The oil, the anointing oil of gladness. He just pours it over me. And there's an overwhelming peace in my household, and there's an overwhelming peace in my career, and the prophecies that have been guiding me have been rewarded with the anointing. Gladness. When I seek him, that's where the gladness is found. Because the beauty of it is, when he's with me and he gives me joy, it's not based on something that I have over here or something I want over there or have earned back there. Rather, when God gives me something, the one who gave it to me, the world can't take it away. Because he gave it. The world can take away what the world gives, but the world can't take away what God gives. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 says, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that at the proper time, God will exalt you. When I'm seeking the exaltation, I become weary in waiting on the proper time. When I'm seeking to be obedient, I keep myself from being frustrated. In the place of obedience, in the place of doing, I'm waiting on the Lord. What's going on? I'm waiting on the Lord. Well, you sure look like you're doing a lot, because that's what waiting looks like in the kingdom. Waiting in the kingdom is being faithful at the thing that you've already been told to do. And in the proper time, the one who's been faithful, God then exalts. Don't you worry about your time. You just worry about obedience. Believing, living in accordance with the prophecies. What is the prophecy? That at the proper time, the Lord will exalt you. My confidence is in Him. My direction is from Him. My faithfulness is to Him. I'm not looking to the world to promote me. I'm not looking to the world to make me happy. I'm looking to Him to do the thing that He promised to do when I do the thing that He charged me to do. And in the proper time, you will be exalted. Because He says, where's Amy Reed? I just heard her. There she is. Hey, Denver folks, what's up? See, there's a warfare to be waged in the waiting. And sometimes we quit in the warfare. We quit in the waging because we don't keep the prophecy in front of us. We don't keep the command in front of us. We don't keep the thing that breathed life into our living in front of us. He said, buy them. Like, do we get that? By them, you may wage a good warfare. By the prophecies, by the instruction, by the commands, by the thing you're charged to do, by them, you may wage a good warfare. Jesus found Himself led by the Spirit of the Lord to fast for 40 days. And in the middle of obeying the command that the Spirit of the Lord had given Him, the enemy came. He was led by the Spirit of God to a place of isolation, solitude, really, peacefulness. He's just in a beautiful wilderness without a bunch of people around. And he's just spending time in the presence of God, obeying the command to fast. And in the middle of that, Satan came, and in this particular text in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 4 says that he came, and the tempter came and said to Jesus, if you are the Son of God. If. The tempter will always come and question your call. The tempter will always come and question your destiny. The tempter will always come and question your abilities. If you were a good leader, you wouldn't have these people that are doing terrible. If you were really a loving parent, your kids' grades would be better. If. And the if is to convince you to look away from the prophecies, because if you can look away from what God is saying and be distracted, now all of a sudden you find yourself at a more opportune time to be deceived. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. And Jesus said, it is written. What is that? The prophecy that was before Him. It is written. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. You see, it's the word that comes from God. It is the direction that God gives us. It is that life that He speaks over us. That's what calls us forward. We have to desire that word from heaven. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 1 says, pursue love. What was love? The commands. This is the love of God, right? That you keep his commandments. Pursue love. So I'm keeping the commands. That's what I'm doing over here. That's the work. But what about the fun stuff? And desire spiritual gifts, especially that you will prophesy. It's not grinding with no faith here. No, I'm doing the hustle, but I'm believing God to speak. I'm in the middle of this, and it's a little difficult, but I know if he'll say something, I'll have the strength to carry on. So I'm still doing, but God speak. When we come to the house, we desire God to speak, to talk to us. We don't walk in with apathy. We don't walk in with no faith. We walk in with the desire to hear God and to see him. Pursue love, yes, but earnestly desire spiritual gifts, especially that you would prophesy. Why prophecy? Why is such a big deal? Because by the prophecies we wage a good warfare. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 4. It says, the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. We're not going to figure it all out with more money. We're going to figure it all out with better therapy. We're not going to figure it all out with this system over here. The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. But they have divine power to destroy strongholds. That's the warfare. That's the battle. That's the thing that we're waging. Our weapon isn't of the flesh, but it has divine power to destroy strongholds. And sometimes in charismatic circles, this is where we get all excited. We're like, yeah, I'm destroying strongholds. And people that are new are like, what are we talking about? We're casting them down. What am I casting down? How do we destroy strongholds? Verse 5, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion that is raised against the knowledge of God. And we take every thought captive to obey Jesus. So this idea of pulling down, destroying means we're doing the thing that we've been called to do. Because when the enemy tells us something, he raises up a lie or an argument that is against the knowledge of God. What do? I cast it down. What does it mean that I cast it down? That means I put the prophecy in front of me. The thing God told me to do is louder than the whisper of the enemy. The thing that God told me to do is brighter than the darkness of the enemy. And by doing and seeing and speaking, I now put behind me what the enemy is trying to do. So when the enemy lies to you, I shout the truth. He's not gonna stop. The lie isn't going away. The truth has to just be louder. The light just has to be turned on. Let me close with this. A few years ago, I was in a dark place. Like, I don't know if you've ever gotten there where it just, I won't insult people who deal with clinical issues, but you just didn't feel like yourself. Like, it wasn't, I wouldn't call it depression, but it was dark. And I wasn't happy. And I was just smiling. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Awesome. And I didn't talk to anybody because I didn't know what to say. Like, I didn't know how to describe this. But you're just living, but you're not seeing what you thought you were going to see. You'd put time into children and you weren't seeing the fruit. You put time into your profession and you're not seeing the fruit. It's not that anything is bad, it's just it's not good. And I was frustrated. And I was preaching from frustration instead of vision. And I was parenting from fear instead of faith. Like I was just, what might they do? I'm gonna parent against that. And they're like, I haven't even done that. Yeah, but you might. And we're just taking care of this early. Okay, I'll fill out my college application, but I'm 8. You do things from fear. You do things from frustration. And everything was a reaction for me. And I wasn't used to living that way. And I was just getting more frustrated and more frustrated and more frustrated. And I got to this place, like I remember praying this prayer. I said, God, like, why am I even doing this? Why am I preaching? Like, do I even like people? Why? Why plant a church? Like there's thousands of churches. Why? Why am I doing this? I began to question. If you are, right? And now I'm living this way over here. And I found now the joy in obeying the commands was becoming fleeting. Because now I wasn't doing things for the right reason. I wasn't doing things out of this just love for God and desire to obey God. I was just like, it was obligation to me. And the life was getting sucked out of it all. And so I asked God again, why am I doing this? And this went on for weeks. And heaven was silent. And I just got angrier and angrier and angrier. My wife finally at one point, she says, do you think like you need some counseling? No, I counsel. Proud. It was miserable. And I'm in church, and Dad came to Denver to preach. It was like, the first time I'd had off in years. I'm sitting there just listening to the gospel. And he said something about David and the faithfulness of David. And then he talked about David's heart after God. And then he just kept on, and I heard nothing else. Because in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord whispered, that's why. All I needed was a that's why. I desire prophecy because it is the guideposts that we wage a good warfare. I desire for the Spirit of the Lord to speak because there is life in that spoken word. I desire for God to move because in his movement, the oil of gladness is poured over me. And there is nothing that can satisfy our need for the movement of God and the word of God and the spiritual gifts of God and the prophecy from God. There is nothing that should satisfy our desire for that except for him. So if you are in this house this morning and you're a little bit frustrated and you're a little bit discouraged and you've been going through some things that you haven't wanted to go through, could I just tell you, it's time to prophesy. It's time to lift up your voice. It's time to hear from heaven. It's time to humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he will exalt you by every word that proceeds from his mouth, because we don't live by bread alone, but we in this house live by every word that comes from God. So prophesy, church. You tell your situation. You cannot stand against the power of God. You cannot fulfill my destiny. Only he can. And I look to him. The one who got me started is the one who's going to finish this work. I look to Jesus. And it's that glory that is waking up the earth this hour. It is that glory that calms the sea. It is that glory that lifts our heads. It is that glory that whispers direction. It is that glory that satisfies us with his joy and his peace, so we can keep waging a good warfare. Thank you, church. I love you guys.